How many times have you been watching a true crime documentary and learned that the police allowed someone to continuously abuse their victim or repeatedly ignored the pleas of a victim before the person finally kills their victim? Too many. When I graduated law school and became a public defender, the question I was often asked was a question I know every defense attorney everywhere has been asked 1,000 times, and that's, how do you sleep at night? And as an abolitionist, or someone who just generally opposes the prisons and policing, the question you're most often asked is, if we abolish police and/or prisons, what do we do with rapists and murderers? Neither of those questions evoke the internal dilemma the people asking them assume they do. They're actually some of the first questions we ask and answer for ourselves to lay the foundation for what we believe. The first question, how do you sleep at night? With my phone on sleep mode and the cat suffocating me. The question implies that one's conscience would keep them up at night, knowing they represent guilty people, which would necessitate that I believe that what I'm doing is wrong, and that people who are charged with crimes are guilty and thus deserving of the criminal system I'm wrongly helping them navigate. But I don't believe that. In the 1963 case Gideon versus Wainwright, the Supreme Court determined that people have a right to legal representation in criminal proceedings against them and must be provided an attorney if they can't afford it, thus establishing your right to a public defender. I don't just believe that you have a right to representation, but I believe that you have the right to the best representation possible. Further, I believe that the system itself is designed to put the most intentionally disadvantaged populations on trial for the ways the system intended and expected that they would respond to the circumstances the government has left them in, which is precisely why the vast majority of people in our criminal system are represented by public defenders, and public defenders only represent people living well beneath the poverty line. And the government then makes billions and billions of dollars via fines and fees they charge those poor people and their families with and make through their unpaid labor. So again, how do I sleep? Sleep mode. Second question. If we abolish prisons, what do we do about rapists and murderers? First, that question implies that either the intention or the result of prisons is to deal with rapists and murderers. Neither is true. The police routinely choose to ignore cases of sexual violence, domestic violence, and murder when the victims are women or children or boys, and they tell the public that they weren't able to make an arrest for one dishonest reason or another. Time and time again, police have had far more than everything they've needed to make an arrest, and simply chose not to. How many times have you been watching a true crime documentary and learned that the police allowed someone to continuously abuse their victim or repeatedly ignored the pleas of a victim before the person finally kills their victim? Too many. But instead of the true crime documentary highlighting how the police willfully failed to prevent the very kinds of horrible crimes they bamboozled the public into believing they're there to protect them from, and that the dangerous criminal the police simply ignored was just some especially advanced criminal who couldn't be stopped, my mind goes to Rodney Alcala, aka the dating game killer, who was the subject of the Netflix movie Woman of the Hour, starring Anna Kendrick. The Netflix movie tells an incredibly truncated version of the horrific and prolific murdering spree of Rodney Alcala, who is suspected of having killed more than 100 women, men, and children for at least a decade. The Netflix movie chooses to center itself around a woman Rodney Alcala met when he appeared on a dating show for one episode in the midst of his killing spree. The woman was played by Anna Kendrick, and the movie treats her as a protagonist, although in real life, she and the dating show could not be less relevant to the horror story that was this insidious, evil man's narrative. Because although Alcala did win the dating show, the woman played by Anna Kendrick told the studio that he seemed weird and she never actually went out with him or saw him again. What the movie does do better than most true crimes, though, is it attempted to highlight that the police failed to act. In the movie, a friend of one of Alcala's victims tells us that she had gone to the police to report Alcala, and she's shown both being ignored by the police and being ignored by the dating game studio when she tried to make the dating game studio aware that he was dangerous. And while I credit the movie with at least bothering to shine a little light on the negligence of the police, in real life, the truth was so much worse. There were so many horrific crimes the police willfully allowed Alcala to commit and/or get away with. They had opportunity after opportunity to stop him, knowing he was a rapist, an abuser, a child molester. Would you even believe me if I told you that in 1968, the police knew Alcala had literally lured an 8-year-old girl into his apartment, brutally raped and beat her with a steel bar, and left her in a pool of her own blood, and she ended up spending 32 days in a coma? Police knew what happened because a man who'd witnessed Alcala luring the little girl into his apartment called the police. So that's how the police were able to arrive and find the little girl in her pool of blood. But somehow he managed to flee. And then the police made no effort to pursue his arrest warrant, allowing him to get all the way to New York City, where he continued killing people. In fact, in 1977, after already having been arrested, rearrested, and convicted for sexually assaulting another 13-year-old girl and becoming a registered sex offender, his parole officer just let him fly from LA to New York City, where he immediately murdered several other women. This went on repeatedly, where police knew exactly what danger he posed and had every opportunity to protect the public, but just shrugged their shoulders. But speaking of having the opportunity to protect yourself, today's sponsor is Aura. If you haven't been taking precautions with your personal information online before, today is the day to start, because you have never been more vulnerable than you are right now. This year has seen a number of high-profile data breaches, raising serious concerns about personal information security. Dell had a breach, United Healthcare had a breach, even Ticketmaster had a breach. United Healthcare's breach was literally the largest ever healthcare data breach in US history. Hackers have stolen over 2.9 billion records from national public data, which offers personal information for employers, private investigators, staffing agencies, and others doing background checks. These stolen records include a person's full name, address, date of birth, social security number, and phone number, along with alternate names and birth dates. And members of the hacker group have reportedly released this information for free. That's why you need to use Aura. Aura alerts me if they find my phone number, email, or social security number on the dark web. They're going to let me know as soon as possible if anyone tries to use this information to access my credit or bank accounts. They also provide a bunch of other features to keep you safe online, all inside one app. You do not have to live like this and be vulnerable to hackers. Instead, you can go to my link, aura.com/Olurinatti, to try 14 days for free. That's all the time Aura needs to find out if any of your personal data is exposed. I highly recommend you do this right now. So again, go to aura.com/Olurinatti to start protecting your information, or click the link in the description below. Thank you for sponsoring Aura. Now, back to the video. And it doesn't even have to be a scenario as dangerous or rare as the dating game killer or a serial killer. The police fail to protect people from far less insidious figures every day. Do you remember Gabby Petito, the 22-year-old woman who was killed by her fiance Brian Laundrie in 2021? Probably. But do you also remember that he had assaulted Gabby the night before he killed her, and police responded to the scene and simply chose not to help her or to investigate? And police don't even just fail to investigate or make arrests in case of abuse. Sometimes they become the abusers. In 2020, a 14-year-old girl was raped by a 17-year-old, and already traumatized, this young girl didn't even want to report it. She just wanted it to be over with. But her mom called the police, and Officer Rodney McNair showed up. He stood in this mother and young girl's living room and convinced them she needed to report it. He said to the little girl, "If I'm a young man that has done something wrong to a young lady and she doesn't follow up and press the issue, then I'm gonna go out and do it to another young lady. And it's gonna be worse maybe the next time, because I'm gonna think in my head, oh, I got the power. I can go further this time," end quote. So the little girl agreed to make the report and go with him. He then proceeded to rape and groom that little girl for months. I don't really need to drive home what kind of monster does this. What I do need to drive home is just how common this is. Quote, "A Washington Post investigation has found that over the past 2 decades, hundreds of police officers have preyed on children, while agencies across the country have failed to take steps to prevent these crimes. At least 1,800 state and local police officers were charged with crimes involving child sexual abuse from 2005 through to 2022, the Post found. Abusive officers were rarely related to the children they were accused of raping, fondling, and exploiting. They most frequently targeted girls who were 13 to 15 years old and regularly met their victims through their jobs." Whenever you talk about abolition, which is in and of itself a vision for the future, but when you talk about abolishing police and prisons, people always reply, "What about rape? What do we do about the rapists?" And I'm always trying to explain to people that the criminal system we have is not about addressing rape. Not only would most victims of rape and sexual assault be the first ones to tell you that they got everything but compassion and justice when they tried to report what happened to them, but the perpetrators are often the police themselves. I say all that to say, I think a better question I think people could ask defense attorneys and abolitionist types like myself if you really want to tussle and see a difference of opinion. And it's the question I'm actually going to be exploring today, because I think a lot of people and abolitionists actually do struggle with this. And that's, what do we do about killer cops? Or put simpler, can people who believe prisons should be abolished demand that police who commit police brutality and kill people be criminally charged and sent to the very prisons we want abolished? My short answer is yes, but I believe that the fruitlessness of that endeavor is precisely why we should be abolitionists. Allow me to talk your ear off for a little while so that hopefully by the time I'm done, that answer makes sense to you. Reasonable minds can disagree though. My guy, Alex Vitale, author of End of Policing, and who I consider an authority on abolition, haven't seen exactly eye to eye on this topic, although I do not disagree with him at all. If you ask Alex this question, he would probably say something along the lines of, no, you either can't be an abolitionist and call for the charging of killer cops, or that you at least shouldn't be an abolitionist calling for the charging of killer cops, because in one way or another, you're enforcing and legitimizing the very system you want abolished. And you're playing into this idea that what justice is criminal charges and convictions. And that underlying rationale enables the prison industrial complex to keep expanding. And he is not wrong. That is sound. And I pretty much agree. I just have a little bit more to say on it. I believe that as an abolitionist, you can 1, enjoy seeing killer cops prosecuted, 2, join in on the people's protests or demands that killer cops be charged, 3, draw attention to how infrequently killer cops are prosecuted by the criminal system, or 4, wish killer cops felt the weight of the criminal system they weaponize against people every day, so long as you recognize and explicitly make clear in your advocacy that prosecuting killer cops is not justice, that it does not do shit to save any lives, to stop police brutality, to root out injustice, or to reform the criminal system in any way. It does nothing to change the circumstances that led to the particular police killing or to prevent another one from happening again. At most, it allows people and communities who are grieving, who live under the weight of the criminal system's cruelty, to see the people who usually enact that cruelty get a little bit of their comeuppance once in a while. And for Black people living in a nation where police disproportionately brutalize our communities for generations, I cannot scold Black people or anyone really, abolitionists or not, for wanting to see the system that oppresses them, that very much so still exists, just once in a while get the oppressors themselves. For me, I highlight when police kill people, and I highlight when they haven't been charged, and when they're charged but not convicted. I don't highlight that because I believe justice is charging or convicting killer cops. I don't highlight that because I want it to happen. I highlight that because it's proof of precisely why this system should be abolished, because it functions to protect white supremacy. The mere fact alone that police murder people daily but are seldom ever punished at work, let alone by the legal system, is itself evidence of why we shouldn't trust in this system or expect it to protect us. So for me, I point out that killer cops rarely get charged, not because I think they should or shouldn't get away with murder, but because I'm trying to help everyone else see that regardless of what you want, the system is designed for police to get away with murder and general brutality, because it's the system that enables it to happen in the first place. It doesn't only empower them to do it, but it's what it expects to happen. The violence is routine. It's a part of the job. It's how they control and beat specific populations into submission. You wouldn't know it if you checked the news or the trending topics on your social media timelines, but the police have killed 1,145 people so far this year that we know of. I don't think this will come as a surprise to anyone, but the media lies to us. But more than that, the media shapes what we think and how we see the world around us. Media does that through the stories they choose to cover, how they choose to cover those stories, what they fail to cover altogether, what they underreport, and what they overreport. The media sensationalizes crime by overreporting much rarer occurrences of violent crime and overreporting things like retail theft and outright manufacturing crime waves even when crime is at an all-time low. But you probably knew all that. I think most people are aware of how the media and social media alike can overrepresent some things as opposed to others. But I'm betting that there is a significant amount of people who would disagree with me if I said, you know what the media does in fact underreport? Police killing people. And I wanted to intentionally distinguish between police brutality and police killing, because it's important that we understand that it does not have to rise to the level of murder to be police brutality, abuse, or criminal conduct on behalf of the police. Murder is a form, if not the height of police brutality, but it's not the only thing that qualifies as police brutality. Because media has shaped our understanding of police brutality, the everyday violence of police on our streets and within our criminal system doesn't get treated as though it's police brutality. And I say within our criminal system because the abuse of incarcerated people has been completely left out of the police brutality narrative altogether, as so many people see the abuse of incarcerated people as permissible, as an acceptable function and consequence of ending up in the system, which is why people die in jails all around the country every day and the media doesn't even bother to report their names, and no one makes them. Places like the New York State Department of Corrections have gone a step further and straight up will not not tell the public about the deaths happening behind bars anymore altogether. And they're able to do that through no true pushback or mass outrage. We've become so accustomed to media and entertainment that casually displays police routinely being aggressive and assaulting people during the course of arrests or interrogations without scrutiny, that we often don't process that kind of behavior as improper or illegal or even brutality because we see it as acceptable policing, which in and of itself demonstrates how inextricable brutality is from policing. I know that the American public, mostly the non-Black American public, right and the left, believes that police brutality is covered ad nauseum, because whenever the media does cherry pick a single murder the police committed, like was the case with George Floyd in 2020, the left complains about ally fatigue and the right launches campaigns to end the woke mind virus by banning books, taking history out of the schools, defunding education, and ending affirmative action. But despite how much either group may think they're being beat over the head with coverage about police killings, they're maybe being politely tapped on the back of their shoulder once in a while with the occasional chalk-lined reminder that no matter how modern and progressive our world can look, if you're busy staring at the Obamas and other examples of Black excellence, people are being murdered by the police quite literally every single day in this country. For every George Floyd or Breonna Taylor that you hear about, there's a Drayshawn Reed and a Dijon Kizzee and a Dan Roy Henry you didn't. We are 11 months into 2024 and the police have killed at least 1,145 people this year. But how many of those cases have you heard about? How many? I don't wager very many. My heart breaks for Sonia Massey, the 36-year-old Black woman who was killed this year because she called 911 for help, only for Illinois police to arrive and shoot her to death in her own home. My heart breaks for 43-year-old Kevin Durham, who was in his home with his 15-year-old daughter in Vegas just nights ago when intruders broke in with a gun. Kevin tried to wrestle the intruders off. He tried to protect his daughter, and he called the police for help, only for the police to arrive, and instead of stopping the intruders, the police shot Kevin to death in his own home. They shot him 5 times. Last year, police killed at least 1,243 people, and that's just actually who they admit to killing, because there's no telling how many they're not admitting to, because understand that the police don't just defend themselves against the murders we watch them commit on video. They cover murders up too. In 2019, Louisiana police told Ronald Green's family that he died in a car accident immediately after hitting a tree. It was more than 2 years later when the family obtained body camera footage revealing the police kicked, dragged, and tased him to death. Just last year, Betterston Wade spent 172 days searching for her son Dexter Wade. She reported him missing to the police and they told her that they could not find him. Whole time, they had known that on March 5th, 2023, less than an hour after Dexter left his mother's home, a Jackson police officer hit him with his car and killed him as he walked across the road. The police knew his name, they knew his mother's name, they knew she was looking for him, but they told her nothing and allowed her son's body to sit in a county morgue unclaimed until he was buried in an unmarked grave in a penal farm. What I'm trying to drive home is that there are only 365 days in a year, and the lion-ass police still admit to more killings than there are days every year. Every year. And it's worth mentioning that of the 1,243 people that police admit to killing in 2023, 27% of them were Black, despite the fact that Black people only make up 13% of the population. But this conversation isn't even about the fact that police disproportionately kill Black people. It's bigger than that. I'm sure you've heard someone say they don't want to become just another hashtag, but the real fucked up reality is that most people the police murder don't even get that much. We only hear about police brutality if people are able to force it into the discourse and public outrage demands the police be charged. And that's what I really want to talk about today. 98.1% of police are not charged for the killings they commit. And of the few that are, only a third are convicted. But I'm sure you didn't need the statistics to know that. How many times have you seen that a prosecutor declined to charge officers who killed someone? How many times have you seen grand juries choose not to indict, or for the only consequence an officer who killed someone to experience is paid administrative leave? And the issue on top of another issue is not only is it incredibly rare for killer cops to be charged or convicted, the few times they are, the media and the government try to convince the public that this is justice and proof that the system is changing somehow, when that could not be further from the truth. My mind goes to the murder of George Floyd and the way this nation was placated by the conviction of Derek Chauvin, the officer who snuffed his life out after kneeling on his neck and ignoring his pleas. I remember people rejoicing when he was convicted, either pretending or truly wanting to believe that this conviction, the protest they'd witnessed that summer, meant anything other than one officer was being discarded in order to protect the entire institution. The whole purpose of cherry picking and choosing some killer cops to punish once in a blue moon for things the entire institution of police do regularly is to further entrench this idea in people's minds that policing is not the problem. Just these specific police officers were the problem, and all that needs to be done to correct the problem is to get rid of them, the sacrificial lamb, so to speak. Which is part of the reason why I don't think police and other agents of white supremacy should be the primary beneficiaries of our advocacy as abolitionists, and why grieving communities calling for the prosecution of killer cops did not hurt our efforts as abolitionists. Because not only is our advocacy as abolitionists much better served anywhere else than in service of our oppressors, the system will rarely prosecute killer cops regardless of the wants of the communities they've harmed. And those that are prosecuted were not prosecuted because we wanted them prosecuted. They were accounted for by the system that always planned to sacrifice a few to appease us. The rare and deliberate prosecution of a handful of killer cops is not what's upholding our criminal system or preventing it from being abolished. There are far bigger fish to fry. But more than that, who am I to tell Black mothers grieving their children who've been murdered by the police that in the current world, where the criminal system still exists and punishes them daily and harshly, that they should not call for the police to be punished as they would have been had they done the same? Am I to tell grieving family they're legitimizing and enabling the prison industrial complex? I don't think it's necessary we do that. The system will ignore the many killer police and sacrifice a few regardless. And that's what Derek Chauvin was, just like it's what the 5 Black officers who beat Tyree Nichols to death were. Because at the exact moment the nation celebrated Derek Chauvin's conviction and the lie of a new America, over in Columbus, Ohio, police officer Nicholas Reardon was shooting a 16-year-old Black girl to death. Her name was Ma'Khia Bryant, and she was in foster care. Ma'Khia was being attacked by 2 adult women, and she was holding a knife to defend herself from these 2 adult women attacking her. And the police, the ones so many believe, protect, and serve, arrived on the scene, and instead of helping that child, he shot her 4 times and killed her. And on March 11, 2022, a grand jury declined to charge that officer because one conviction means nothing. It changes nothing, and it does not save a single life. So while I will never judge or oppose the people who seek charges for killer cops, I want us to focus less on how we respond to killer cops and focus more on what we can do to prevent them from killing people, which will require us to tackle over-policing, starting with removing police from things they absolutely do not need to be handling, like mental health crises, traffic offenses, schools. Abolition is a vision of the future, a world where we've invested in people and communities and rid ourselves of the conditions that create crimes and thus have done away with the need for prisons and policing. But we know that prisons and police will not be abolished overnight. So while it's here, in spite of all our wishing and resistance, in my mind, I don't think there's any material reason why on the rare occasion the system intentionally chooses to sacrifice individual killer cops for the sole purpose of protecting the system at large. An abolitionist, a human being with emotion like everyone else, someone a part of a community they're fighting with and for, isn't allowed to rejoice in that with the rest of the community if they so choose, or to simply support their community in that pursuit, because it's how that community is choosing to cope, to grieve, so long as they're clear about what those charges or convictions mean in the grand scheme of dismantling the system and saving future lives, which isn't very much. I oppose the criminal system precisely because it protects and upholds white supremacy. So there's no reason why being an abolitionist would require me to oppose the rare instances when white supremacists who enforce and weaponize that criminal system are sacrificed by that system. You can be an abolitionist and simply not give a fuck what happens to killer cops.